and what comes out. In this case, it's the number 42. Here also, and this is minus 42. But the input varies, and what often happens is, if you don't know what to write, is there are so many different options, so many different cases that you don't know how to reduce them back to a simple case. Does this make sense to you, or is this still a bit too highly abstracted? Okay, so let's say we have this case, and how does this case differ from that case? Any ideas? Like it's quite simple, but or how does this case differ from that case?
It has white space.
It has white space. Anything else? How could, for example, these two differ, or these two? Like white space is one thing that can differ. What else can differ?
Lex.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
The sign.
Mm-hmm. The sign. What would happen in such a case? Is this also a valid input, or what should the function return in that case?
The normal a to I would produce 0.
Mm-hmm. 0. What would happen in a case where you have a number that's maybe 126 characters? This is just a random number. Is this a legal number?
No.
No. Why not?
Because an integer has a shorter amount of numbers.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So this one would be invalid, and it might return some error code. So this one is an error code, might be 0, and this one is an error. So again, just to recap what we just did, we didn't look at the code. We just looked at what the function should do. So this is always, like when you see yourself being stuck at code, the problem is not that you're stuck at the code, the problem is mostly that you don't have a clear picture of what the function does. In most cases, the best idea is to just forget about the code, recap for a second what the function really should do so that you really have a clear picture of all the different cases. There are spaces or no spaces. What else might happen? Well, you have a sign or no sign. What else do we have? Well, too long. Is there also a too short? Question for you.
Can be no other than, it can be not other than no, or
Mhm.
than.
Like this might be a too short number. This one might be too long. This one might be too short. Or there might be a different case which is okay regarding the length. So as you can see, there are multiple cases here that we all need to handle. And if you're stuck at this position, writing a list of everything that could happen might be the best idea. And once you have a pretty complete list of what could go wrong, or what variations are in here, the first step, what you need to do is normalize. So the first thing you have to write is you have to insert some kind of pattern. So all the patterns just go here. And the first step is to normalize the input. So for example, if you have spaces, you need to find a way to remove them. If you have a plus or a minus, you need to process that before you can process the number. If you have a number that's too long, well, that's actually part of the other number part. So the spaces always come before the number. A number with spaces after that we don't really care about. So normalizing the spaces is going to be the first step. The second step is going to be normalizing what comes next, which is the sign. And then the third step is, well, too long, too short, okay. So we can break down things based on what can go wrong, and then we look at the order in which things can go wrong, which is first of all the spaces, then maybe the sign, and then the number. And as you can see, we already have 3 different parts now that we can go on in order actually. And now we can just break the problem down into, well, process the spaces, process the sign, process the number. Now we have three more steps that are completely standalone. They are completely disconnected from the rest. And that sounds like a start, right? Still, we have no idea what to type right now. But at least we have identified a few similarities or maybe distinctions even in the test cases and an order. And once we have that, we need a pattern for that. Does this make sense to you? This is a maybe new way of thinking, so don't be too confused about it. You'll see if you get there. So, like when you encounter a string that has spaces, what you often need to do, skip spaces. This is something that happens quite a lot in programming. This is not unique to HI. Once you write another function that maybe you read some configuration file, or this is going to come later in the exercises, you'll often see that you need to remove spaces. And once you've removed them once, like the pattern will become clear to you. So if you haven't seen a pattern in your life, then of course you don't know what to type, but after a while you just see some similarities about it. Okay, so let's fill it in. This is something I'm just going to present to you. Your homework or exercise is to just pay attention to the patterns that occur more or less often. So let's just fill in something. So the first pattern, since we have a string here, and we need to, we have a string that starts here, and we just need to skip the white spaces. There's a pattern for that. That basically lets us skip a sequence of elements or a sequence of characters, depending on whether there's spaces or whatnot. And this is so the first step is skip white space. And the pattern that we need for that is called a string iteration pattern. And it looks like this. And you might see a bit of similarity to the previous iteration pattern that we had, where we had an I equals 0, and here an I++, and then you just went on and had space for another pattern. It's similar to that, but it's not the exact same. So this is a string iteration pattern, and what this allows you to do is just skip over elements in order. Now, for example, what this does is, as long as we haven't arrived at space, as long as we have a space, we skip the current character. And when people read code, they often read it like this. As long as we have a space at our current position where we are, we just increment our pointer, which basically translates to going to the next character. And now it almost reads like English. As long as we have a space, we go to the next character. Do we have a space? Yes, we go to the next character. And what happens if we have such a case like this? As long as we have a space, but the 4 isn't a space. So we don't advance, and we just go to the next pattern. So again, something like this is going to appear quite often. And what this does is, as long as this condition is not true, as long as this condition is true, it will do this. But once we're here, we can be sure that str is now not equal to a space. Because as long as it's a space, it's going to do this and repeat. But it would only break out if the condition becomes false, basically meaning we are now at something different from the space, which could be either the plus sign, which could be the 4, which could be something else. And so what we now have is all our input now has no space in the beginning. So the first part of the problem is already crossed out now. We don't have to care about spaces at this point anymore, because again, we have skipped over them, and so our condition now is our current character is not a space right now, because as long as it's a space, we just advance. Now we're here, it's not a space anymore, problem solved. So the best pattern in order to skip elements is often this pattern. And it kind of looks like this. Sometimes this condition might change, sometimes a few other parts might change, but generally speaking, your code is going to look more or less like this when you do something like that. Now the next thing, of course, is the plus that we need to process. For that, we need a pattern that's not a while, because while is always for 1, 2, or more spaces, or something like this. The plus is only 1. We don't have plus 42. This is an invalid one. So what we need to do is we only have to check for this character, but not with a while statement, because it's only 1. We need to use an if statement for that. Because an if statement will not repeat after the condition was true. Like, it will not execute this and go back. The if statement will just execute it or not, and then it would just continue regardless. And this is exactly what we need for something like plus or minus. Can you still follow, or should I explain a few pieces a bit better? Okay. By the way, if you have any questions, just ask them in between. This might be better than doing a big question round in the end. Okay. Skip white space. Is the first thing we have done no white space anymore. Now we only need to isolate all the cases that are in here. Sign, no sign, and what does the sign mean? Well, it can be either a plus or a minus. Sounds like an if statement, an if pattern, and this is what we are going to do now. We check for plus or minus. Because just as with the space, if we don't have space, we don't care about it, we just skip it. If we don't have a sign, we just skip it. But if we have a plus or a minus, we need to process that. So what we do is, if str is equal to a plus, and here again our pattern leaves us a bit of space. We can fill it in with something that we need. Otherwise, if it's not a plus, it might be a minus or already a digit. So it might be a plus, it might be a minus, or it could already be a digit. So we first check the plus case. If it's true, we do this. Otherwise, if the string equals to be a minus, then we also have some space in between that we can fill with something. And otherwise, if it's neither a plus or a minus, then it should be a digit, which is actually step number 3 that's going to start. So can you see how I built this up? It's not like, okay, there might be digits involved, so I'm going to do something with digits here.